Hey, it's Andrew Huang. In this video, I've collected 7 tips that I haven't seen many people, or in most cases, any people talking about on their tutorials, blogs, and all that. So I thought I would cover them. It's stuff that could be really handy for anybody who's working on music. And for me, a couple of them even often replace the standard or traditional way of doing things. Yeah, so I think it's super helpful. Want to share. Let's get into it. This first tip is so simple, I can't believe I didn't start doing it sooner, but it's basically just using volume automation to bring out the musicality in a performance. And I'm gonna demonstrate this using ShaperBox from Cable Guys. Cable Guys are sponsoring this video, so huge shout out to them. You don't have to have ShaperBox to do what I'm showing you in this video, but I do legitimately use it all the time, and it makes a lot of things much faster. ShaperBox is this tool that's really handy for helping you draw quick looping automations. Their pen tool is really well designed. It's actually faster than any other automation drawing tool I've used. So I've got this percussion part. And this is something I felt I had played pretty expressively, but once I was listening to the recording, I felt like the groove got a little bit lost. So I just drew what I felt like the volume should be doing to bring it out. This is actually something I did a ton on this project because I was working with a fairly limited sample set. This was actually a commercial for Target that I worked on earlier this year, and they wanted me to use just school supplies because it was like a back to school campaign. It was really handy to be able to quickly bring a deeper level of expression to things like lunch boxes and backpacks. Tip number 2 is transient sculpting. And again, my example is going to be this Target commercial that I did. So I was using the sound of mechanical pencils at one point. Just rhythmically clicking them. I thought that was a fun thing to incorporate both visually and auditorily, sonically, ear-wise. Originally, the loop sounded like this. And it sounds like a mechanical pencil, but in my mind, I always felt like the sound was snappier. Clearly not the case. I recorded these mechanical pencils and that's what they sounded like, but I wanted that snappiness to it. And so I drew this very intense volume automation, also doing the exact same automation on the filter. Much snappier. And I actually only have the filter dialed in about halfway, so we could hear it off. And mix it in a bit. And at 100%, it definitely is starting to sound more artificial. But I'll do this kind of sculpting on drums a lot, just dialing in the perfect attack and decay shape. You could even split it into a low and high band and have them decay slightly differently, or even 3 bands to shape your lows, mids, and highs differently. And you can just dial in the perfect amount of snap that you want, where a lot of the times for that you'd be reaching for a compressor and kind of finessing the attack and release ratios when, a compressor is just changing the volume. So if you just want to get in there and perfectly draw the volume curves that you want, you can get a lot more precise. Making unique percussion out of sustained sounds. I touched on this on my recent video where I used a spring reverb as a drum. So let's look for an impact sound. Sweet, that's gonna give us tons to play with. And this is just chopping out of a longer sustained sound to get rhythm. Throw ShaperBox volume on there. There's a bunch of presets we could look at. You know what, I'm just gonna start with this one, but I'm going to change the length of the loop. Now instead of the loop taking up a bar, it's gonna take up a quarter note. Yeah, we'll just finesse this a little bit. Yeah, so now we've turned this impact sound into something more like a hi-hat. I'm just gonna grab a bar of that as a loop, and that could be like the start of a drum beat. You can make this more hi-hatty by just throwing the filter on after and just making it a high pass. So I've created lots of new percussion sounds just by throwing noises through these kinds of snappy volume envelopes. Gated noise on drums. If we choose noise in ShaperBox, it's got an envelope follower here. So this is detecting the incoming volume and basically making that into an envelope. And so this is gating a noise signal to the volume of this hi-hat that we made, which isn't actually a hi-hat because it was an impact sound that we volume chopped. And then with this threshold control, you can set the level where that noise is actually going to come through. I'm going to dial the mix back so the noise isn't as loud, and we could also high pass the noise. There's a high pass built right into this module of ShaperBox. So just adding gated white noise to our hi-hat adds a lot of sizzle, creating more of that cymbal feel. So comparing it off and on. There are a lot of different noises you can choose from here though, and you can even load in your own sample to be the thing that gets gated. This is also really fun on snare drums. I feel like a lot of times instead of layering more snares on to get the snare sound that you want, just layering on some kind of texture like this can be so cool to give it a more unique sound. Manual sidechaining. This is a huge one. I do this all the time. So I've just built out the beat that we had before. I added the snare onto the hi-hat example and threw in a kick. It's basic, it's whatever, but it'll serve the purposes of this example. So we're gonna go back to our hi-hat track. Now we're already using the volume shaper on here, and with ShaperBox, you can only use one of each at a time, but no big deal. Throw another ShaperBox on there. So we're gonna use volume here. Gonna set it to a quarter note, and we're gonna draw the exact sidechain curve that we want. Maybe we don't want it to completely duck. Maybe we want a super long release. So this is handy besides just being super precise with how you want your sidechain to sound, because with our beat here, we've actually got this extra kick drum, and if we had sidechained normally, we get that extra ducking every one of those kicks, which sometimes you want, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just want that 4 on the floor feeling sidechain. On top of which, we probably also want to be sidechaining from the snare. Now that sounds all right, and I've lucked out with the samples I've chosen, but sometimes you have snares and kicks that have different lengths, and you're trying to dial in your different sidechains so that there's the right amount of ducking on each of them, which, you know, it's just kind of finicky when you could just draw it in however you want it. Sidechain by hand, pro tip. Using a filter to add movement to a pad, but not mixed fully wet. Okay, the most basic pad instrument here. Let's get you playing some kind of nice chord. Throw the filter on. Gonna put mix at like, I don't know, somewhere a little less than half wet, let's say. And we can just draw some nice little curves. So just adding some movement in, where if you compare that to like what it would be like fully wet, or like a lot of people do, a lot of resonance on the filter. So that's more extreme, and sometimes you want to do that, but a lot of times if you just want a little bit more life in your pad sounds, but not something that's necessarily really going to be noticeable and ear-grabbing, you would do this kind of thing. And we could even randomize this automation. Smooth the LFO out there so it's not so jittery around the automation edges. Just a little something to spice up your pad sounds without being really in your face about it. This is something that I feel like I came to late in my production journey, because I started off more as a guitar player, so distortion was kind of an on-off thing. And it was also a kind of 100% wet or dry thing. So a distortion, I think, is really interesting when you automate it and when you mix the original signal with the distorted signal. So here's an example. This is the lead synth part from my track Aeon 2 off my album Space Time. And I just felt like as it was progressing, it needed a little bit more movement to it. And I experimented with a few things and landed on this using ShaperBox to have the distortion increase over a 2-bar period. So if we take the effect off, it sounds like this. I think it's a lot more static. Okay, so that's it for the tips, but I do want to show you one other thing about ShaperBox that's ridiculous, and that's Time Shaper. I've got this beat here. Time Shaper treats its buffer of recorded material, like whatever is passing through in this length of time that you've set the loop at, and it allows you to kind of draw a grid of how the playhead should move through it. So you could jump around in time. You can do these tape stop type effects. I could apply this type of glitching out to the mid band, something different to the low band, and something different to the high band. So a lot of fun glitching stuff out in ways that would take a lot longer to do if you were editing them by hand. And then also because of the interface and the workflow, you're kind of coming up with stuff that you probably wouldn't otherwise. So as of the time of this video upload and for a little while after, there is a sale on ShaperBox over at cableguys.com. Check it out. Super great plugin. Really handy and has so much more to it than I could even fit in this fairly long video. So yeah, don't miss out on that. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again to Cable Guys for sponsoring, and I'll see you in the next one.